quorum of board members, so I would like to call this meeting to order. As I said, I'm the chair, Janet Hurley. Can we have other board members please announce themselves as present? Starting with Sarah.
Sarah Hyde, present.
Brooke Dingledine, present.
Kirsten Sultan, present.
Thank you. Alex Weinhagen is away today, so he will not be present. Our minutes, sorry, let me get to them. I had them open somewhere. Pardon me while I open the minutes. Let's see. I'm sorry, not the minutes, the agenda. So first on the agenda, we have agenda updates. Does anyone have any agenda updates? Okay, so we are going with the agenda as posted. Next then is the opportunity for public comment on non-agenda items and receipt of any correspondence. Do we have any public comment? Okay, seeing and hearing none, we will move on to our consent agenda.
Janet, this is Brooke
Yeah,
Dingledine. I did receive a public comment correspondence by email
Okay.
after our last board meeting from Annette Smith of Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I did not get it posted with the agenda, but I will have it put on our website with the materials for this meeting. And let's see. Sorry, I should have had this up on my screen. Let me just give you a very brief indication. The email that she sent was a news story about the Orleans housing project that Senator Rom Hinsdale had mentioned was of concern due to density requirements. And she wanted that shared with the board because she indicated in her email the implication of referring to this project was that it did not promote good policies because it had 1 acre lot sizes. And this news story indicates that there are many issues of problematic issues associated with the proposal. So she wanted the board just to be aware of that. So I will make sure that that's posted on with the materials for this week's agenda so that it is properly available for people's review.
okay. Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, so back to consent agenda to review and approve the minutes of our last meeting, which was February 24th, 2025.
I have some corrections, but I'd like to make a motion to approve with corrections.
Okay, we have a motion
I'll second.
and a second to that motion. Sarah, you said you have corrections?
Yes, I can email them to Brooke, but I'll quickly go through them. The first is on page 2, under the end of the appeals section, Chair Hurley is dangling. It's the end of the appeal study discussion.
Okay.
And then also on page 2, under the regional plans discussion, replace public engagement with increased community engagement. As I said, I mean, these to you. Replace regional planners with regional planning commissions, and replace environmental justice focused populations with environmental justice focused populations. And then within tier 3 discussion, remove of the planning. On page 3, under the tier 1A discussion, historic preservation tier 1A talks, that should be concern, instead of concern that we are incentivizing development, should be concern about lack of specificity in evaluating character impact. Page 4, floodplain, it should be PLAIN, and that's throughout the document as opposed to PLANE. And then there's, under section 5, Susanna Davis, Susanna should be with an X, just a name misspelling correction, and that's all that I have. I don't know if there's anybody else that has others. I think the only other thing that I'll say is thank you. I think it's very thorough, and I know you're trying to hit the mark with capturing as much, particularly the public comment verbatim. However, I think we could probably be a little bit more succinct overall moving forward. Doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily need to be verbatim.
I wonder if you were trying to use the AI just to see how it worked, Brooke? The AI
Yeah.
transcription?
Yes, and it really is too time consuming. However, I think it is useful for the public comments because to be able to convey a summary of that, I feel more comfortable just using that transcription process to really capture what public folks say. So I will vastly reduce the board issues because they're pretty clearly spelled out, and our materials and the transcript will be with it. But I will continue to use that, I think, for the public comment sections, if that sounds agreeable to folks.
You mean our public guests? Or
Right.
I see. My opinion, my preference is that we, instead of having the transcription, that we have a summary, just a couple of sentences, because we do have the recording that can be referred to.
Okey-doke.
I tend to agree with Janet, but I also am so appreciative for anyone who is helping with preparing these notes and minutes, and I'm loath to kind of criticize. So and I'm also, and maybe we don't need to get into this now, but I'm wondering, Brooke, how you're feeling about, having taken this on. If it's sort of feeling like too much, I'm open to revisiting that as well, just anytime.
It's very challenging. I can't really listen to the extent I would like to, at the same time trying to take minutes. So that's why I've been relying on looking at the recording later. I appreciate wanting like a more condensed version of things. The reason why I was suggesting just using clean up the transcript of the public comments is, quite frankly, it is more time consuming to try to figure out what those 2 or 3 sentences will be to make sure that I'm covering the complete information that the public person is conveying. Because sometimes it's a number of things. So that's why, for me, to go to the transcript, cut and paste, and then take out ums and uhs from those public comments, it's actually much faster and it's accurate. That's why
Okay.
I was sort of leaning towards that. The
I'm
rest
okay
of the
with
stuff,
that.
Yeah.
okay.
Though there were some ums and uhs that got left in there.
I heard. Thought I did the fine the right way, but I'll try it next time better.
Okay,
Thank
It's
you,
just-
Brooke.
yeah, I don't want it to be difficult, so.
Neither do I.
Okay, so we do have some corrections on the table. Sarah was going to transmit those to Brooke via email to make sure of their accuracy and the correction process. Any further discussion or any more corrections? Okay, can we vote on Sarah's motion to approve the minutes with corrections? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
Kirsten.
That was 4 ayes, and there are 4 of us present, so that was a unanimous decision on the minutes. Moving right along, the next item on our agenda is legislative operations and budget updates. And I guess here I would like to draw our attention as a board to the the interim housing exemptions guidance. Some confusion came up in the last few weeks regarding whether projects in areas that are previously developed in either the flood hazard areas or the river corridors were eligible for the interim exemption. Pete has provided some proposed language on page 7 of the guidance to address this confusion. Did board members get a chance to review that language? And Kirsten, I know you had some connection issues. Did you get a chance to look at it previously, or would you like me to read the different language?
I'm sorry to say that I was not able to view
Okay.
this page 7 wording.
Okay,
Like,
so I
because of
will
the
read.
technology issue.
I will read the item that is proposed for amendment. The current guidance has a checkbox, and next to the checkbox it says, the housing project and infrastructure incidental to its use is not within the mapped river corridor or floodplain unless considered infill development according to A&R rule. The newer language is proposed as follows. The housing project and infrastructure incidental to its use is not within the mapped river corridor or floodplain unless the following is proposed new language. Project on open land or part of an existing buildings is in an area containing pre-existing development in areas suitable for infill development as defined in 29-201 of the Vermont Flood Hazard and River Corridor Rule. That strikes out the words considered infill development according to A&R rule. And then there are 2 check marks or 2 check bullets below that paragraph. One says review interim housing exemption map showing these designated areas. And the second check bullet refers to infill development, and initially it states infill development is defined as surrounded by existing development, and then that is proposed to be replaced as follows. Infill development means for the purposes of designated centers, construction, installation, modification, renovation, or rehabilitation of land, interests in land, buildings, structures, facilities, or other improvements in an area that was not previously developed but is surrounded by existing development. For the purposes of farm production areas, infill development means construction on a vacant area within a farm production area. Are there any comments on these proposed language amendments?
I can just say briefly here, Janet, if it's helpful for the board, this language now tracks more closely with the statute, both the statutory language and that part A that Janet was reading, and then under the infill development tracks more closely with the Vermont flood hazard and river corridor rule.
Janet, do you need a motion to approve?
I
or-
do, but I just want to think about this for a moment because I'm not sure that it clears up the confusion. Construction, installation, modification, renovation, or rehabilitation of land, interests in land, buildings, structures, facilities, or other improvements. This says in an area that was not previously developed, but is surrounded by existing development. And Pete, I think that's problematic because you don't have land and buildings and structures and facilities in areas that were not previously surrounded or previously developed. It says in an area that was not previously developed, but if it's got buildings and other facilities, it's previously developed. So I don't know why I didn't notice that earlier, but to me, this does not clarify.
That
This
is,
language.
yeah, no, I hear you. That is language from the river corridor rule. And I think when you read that in collaboration with the statutory language, and the statutory language is highlighted for the board just above that in the guidance, talks about areas containing pre-existing development. So again, it's areas containing pre-existing development and in areas suitable for infill development. So the way that I think about this, and I hope that the guidance document helps clarify this. When you look at the parenthetical of that first portion where it says on open land or part of an existing buildings is in an area containing pre-existing development. You kind of think about it in terms of what is the landscape or the area that we're talking about. I think the intent of the legislature here was if there's a greenfield area that's within one of these designated areas for the housing exemptions, that those and it's also part of a flood hazard area, then those areas would be off limits for the housing exemptions. But where you are in an area where you already have pre-existing development and you already have infill areas that are suitable for infill, those areas would be allowed to be part of the housing interim exemptions.
This is also something, if you want to table this for later, or we could talk about it in an executive session, and when Kirsten and others have time to digest it a little more. Just throwing that out
Yeah.
there. Kirsten, you had your hand up. If you want to.
Kirsten, do you have comments or question?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few questions, I guess. And maybe they belong in executive session, but the language that's been added to the infill development under the checkbox on page 7,
Mhm.
is that wording consistent with wording in 29201 of the Vermont flood hazard area and river corridor rule? Like
That
with
is the wording, that is the direct quote from that
from that ANR
rule.
rule?
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
so there's no conflict between this and the ANR rule,
No,
like that with respect to this checkbox, like,
yeah, and checkboxes, just for the board's awareness on this guidance document, the way that we've arranged it is when there's a check mark, that indicates an area of resources for the individuals that are wanting to learn more about how a particular section works. And the check box is an area that they see what the requirements are, and they can say, yep, I meet that, or I don't meet that. If I check the box, then I meet that particular requirement.
I'm okay to hold off on making a decision on this proposed language since Kirsten in particular does not have access to seeing it right now. And,
so Maddie did send me a copy.
okay,
Thank you, Maddie, and I'm looking at it. So just to be clear too, the other language under that checkbox on page 7 that's been added that says project on open land or part of existing buildings, is that wording also from the ANR rule? And maybe,
No, that's more tracking the statutory language for this particular exemption.
so the statutory language does not have that parenthetical phrase in it.
Is not correct.
on open land or part of an existing buildings.
Yeah.
Hey, Pete, this is Brooke. Can you put the definition of infill development into the chat?
There's no chat.
Oh, there's no chat on this?
There's no chat, but the definition of infill development is the new redlined language.
And Pete is saying that that is from Rule 29201, the Vermont
Okay,
Flood
yeah,
Hazard Area and River Corridor Rule.
Okay, I was trying to compare it, but I didn't have both versions in front of me.
So
Yeah, I find-
I think,
Go ahead, Brooke.
oh, sorry, it's Sarah.
Oh, Sarah,
Um,
sorry.
That's all right. I was just gonna say, so I think what we're trying to accomplish is to say if it is within a mapped river corridor or floodplain, the project is in an area containing pre-existing development suitable for infill development, and sort of further fleshing out what that infill is. But there still has to be a determination that within that area of pre-existing development, that the area is suitable for infill. And that's an area that I have some questions on in terms of why do we need to go the extra mile of saying suitable for infill if there's already pre-existing development within that area?
That's
I
exactly the
think that's my
confusion. Sarah, and I think it stems from inartfully crafted statutory language in Act 181. I kind of wonder if there was maybe a typo in that sentence that said in areas containing pre-existing development or areas suitable for infill development instead of in areas suitable for infill. I think that the intent of the legislature was to allow for housing exemptions in these areas where there was pre-existing development. And to get caught up in exactly whether it meets the definition of areas suitable for infill development is, I think, overly pedantic, if that's the right word. You know, for instance, an existing building is an area of pre-existing development. And if that building is to be converted to housing, I think it meets the interim housing exemption. And to get caught up in trying to figure out whether it meets the definition of infill development according to the A&R rule is, I think, just unnecessary. I think if it doesn't, it just doesn't make any sense. If the legislature's intent was to exempt areas that were previously developed in these river corridors and flood hazard areas, and that it wouldn't make sense that they were only exempting areas that were green areas within areas of existing development. Do you see what I'm saying? That would be an absurd suggestion, that they only meant to exempt areas that are green space in areas of a pre-existing development, rather than they meant to exempt the conversion of existing buildings.
So can I ask a question? I'm not sure if anyone's going to have the answer.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the wording, the checkbox on page 7,
Yeah.
the wording on open land or part of an existing buildings, open land, that in my mind could be subject to different interpretations. Like, could someone, and maybe we should hear from our attorney about this in executive session.
Yeah, it sounds like we're heading into territory where you're gonna ask, you know.
Yeah, I'm
looking at
kind of
legal
focusing on the
interpretation.
word open land a little bit to try to make sure I'm clear on how that would be applied. And
Okay, so I would like to entertain a motion that we postpone this to either a further point in the agenda after our executive session, or that we put it on for next week. But I'd like to resolve the confusion as soon as possible. So if anybody has a motion that addresses those concerns, I'd be happy to hear it.
How about we just table it? I'll move that we table any decision on this until after executive session, and if need be, to move it to later in the agenda, to revisit it later in the agenda.
I would second that motion.
I guess I need to ask, do we need a finding that we need to discuss this in executive session as part of that motion?
No.
I believe that once we get to that point on the agenda and we make a motion to go into executive session, we could probably make it as part of that motion to go into executive session.
Okay, so right now we're going
Legal
to postpone making a decision on amending this language in an effort to clarify the rule for interim housing exemption. Any further comment or discussion on that. Well, actually, did we get a second on that motion?
Yeah, we had Kirsten.
I'll
Okay.
second that.
Any further discussion on the motion to table this till later in the meeting? No? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Kirsten, I.
That was 4 ayes from 4 board members. That was unanimous. So we can move on to the next item on the agenda. Let me get back to the agenda. Well, we are under legislative operations and budget updates. I guess for legislative update, I would just add that we sent memos to the Senate Natural Resources, to the House Environment, and to the Senate and House Appropriations Committee, asking for extension of the 2 limited service positions and asking for $100,000 to help us establish a digital application procedure for regional plans. And then, are there any other updates concerning legislative operations or budget matters from anybody, including staff?
I'll just say on our request, we did send those, and we do have a letter of support from the House Environment supporting a 1.5 year extension of those 2 district coordinator positions, which is very positive, moving in the right direction. And they also, in their letter of support, supported the digital infrastructure ask that we had for $100,000, and they also put in a $50,000 appropriation request for administrative assistance to the board. That was not something that we had requested, but they put into their support letter to the Appropriations Committee.
That's right. Thank you for reminding me of that, Pete. Okay. If nothing more on legislative operations and budget updates, let's move on to the next agenda item, studies and reports, process and updates. Can we start with Brooke on appeals?
Last week, we had a meeting with A&R. So I brought up the issue of the appeals study to try to start the conversation to coordinate with A&R in terms of trying to contemplate the study issues of how to coordinate A&R appeals with Act 250 and zoning as well. One of the issues that I raised, which I think is important and that we will be further investigating, is the notion for our environmental justice responsibilities with regard to the appeals, is how to contemplate allowing people mechanisms that will assist in having them participate in the appeals process, or in the first instance in the permitting process that precedes the appeal. And one of the ideas that I think is very important to study and implement would be either an office of ombudsman or public advocate, so that we can assist in helping people to engage in the process in a manner that does not delay or create obstacles. In fact, it improves the process of either the actual processing of permitting or the appellate process if folks decide to go that route. The reason why I brought that up with A&R is I think that it's important and it would probably be the best option to create a public advocate office that goes across the different permitting programs. We are all under the same obligations under the environmental justice statute, and getting together with A&R and, for example, the Public Utility Commission to try to see if there's a way to combine resources and purpose of an office that would be able to serve all the permitting needs of Vermonters, so that they would. Now, our district coordinators are already engaged in and have for as long as I can remember. They take all comers. They sit down and help folks engage in the Act 250 process, but also making that accessible to our focus populations in terms of language accessibility and other issues that really need study and discussion in how to make a reality in terms of folks being able to meaningfully participate in these processes. So that was the import of a lot of my work last week, was trying to figure out models in terms of being able to share resources and how do we create a model that really does address all of the requirements that we have and to really be able to produce meaningful engagement for folks in issues of very high importance to them in their own neighborhoods. So that is really important work, not only for purposes of the appeal study, but also in our everyday work in making sure that presently we do everything that we can to make sure that our populations that we need to assist and allow the opportunity to be engaged, to have that opportunity.
Brooke, did you discuss these ideas with the A&R group last week?
Yeah, we did very briefly in terms of wanting to set up and getting the right folks to the table. We want Carla, of course, to help assist on this journey because I want to be sure that we use all those resources. We don't want to reinvent the wheel or come up with ideas that maybe don't really suit Vermont or so it's the beginning of the process. But I think it's important if we do this collectively across programs, I think that we can come up with a much better alternative that will be workable and will actually produce results.
Yeah, and I think that the idea that you have here is in line with the EJ law in terms of sharing of resources and centering the civil rights and environmental justice work at A&R through that office that Carla heads. I mean, it seems to be in line with that. So hopefully it's a productive way to look at this. Anything else, Brooke, on appeals?
No, we should have our our first stakeholder list later this week. And so we'll post it so that folks can take a first gander at it for the next meeting. It is a work in progress. We're trying to make sure that we're incorporating folks that we think will still be interested from the past and also newcomers who are interested in engaging about it and can help us to get the right information for the study.
Great, thank you. Sarah, do you have a report on your progress on the Tier 1A work.
Yes, and I think that I'll delve into a little more process too, Janet, so feel free to jump in because I think some of the process work that I've been working on sort of spans over into some of the RPC plan too. Last week I had a great session with Rachel and Alex Pastor going over sort of process of how we are going to be taking in applications and the different sort of reiterative possibilities that you could have. Sort of like a choose your own adventure book in terms of, I think those referred to as swim lanes.
Right.
If things go which way. Beginning to get questions out of these. I'm wondering if you'd like to take some of these questions as part of this report process, or if that's something to be a separate item on a future agenda. And I'll give you one of them is, I think that when we were sort of digesting some of those questions, particularly with like the RPC plan process, was does an applicant submit proof of notice requirements with their final application to the WERB, and other different detail things like that. I'm not sure if those are questions to discuss under the reporting or if those are things that should have their own different agenda item.
I think I would leave that to your discretion. I think at this point, those kinds of details are a little early to discuss in this meeting, until we have more of a procedure that we're proposing. Maybe we can put those questions off. Unless the answer to a question such as that leads us to a particular procedural option. Do you know what I mean? For instance, Alex Pastor and Rachel had asked us last week, when we were discussing the regional plan application process, whether regional plans can be, whether our determination as a board to approve a regional plan or to deny it, whether a denial can be appealed. And the answer to that wasn't clear from statute. However, we had our legal team look into it, and there are clear procedural rules in place that would allow somebody to appeal a denial. So that the answer to that question bears out in terms of how to establish the digital structure for accepting applications and processing those applications. So, that was an important one to answer early on.
I think another one that was sort of important to answer is sort of like with when municipal plans are approved by RPCs, there's before we formally get the Regional Planning Commission final plan to review and comment on, if at the beginning of that process, when it's being submitted to a bunch of the other agencies, if it might be under that sort of a pre-application that we also get a copy to be able to comment on. I think that was something that was discussed just in terms of process. I think that was something that it would seem to be a good thing if we could get an application for the LURB to comment on early on in the process. That's not clearly spelled out anywhere.
Are you asking about a look at a municipal plan that an RPC is approving?
No, at the regional plan. But the regional plan, before it formally comes to the LURB, at the beginning of that sort of process where they're submitting it out to the different state entities, before it gets to the LURB, it would be beneficial for the RPCs to also submit to the LURB a draft copy at that time, sort of initial.
You mean aside from the 60-day before a hearing?
So at the beginning of that 60 days, yes. Not aside, but if we had the, that sort of chart up, I could point to it in the chart, but it's at the very sort of inception of that chart.
Well,
I think
they
you and I
are-
had identified.
So I guess I'm not understanding because they are required to submit the plan to us at that point.
Right, but for our potential comment on it at that point too, informal comments before they formally
I
get
see.
to us, because having a sort of an opportunity to informally comment before it's formally transferred to us at the end of the 60 days might be beneficial.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we certainly have the option to do so. Otherwise, why give it to the LURB 60 days in advance? But currently, there's no statutory requirement for us to do so either. So I think what you're asking then is, you know, it's important for Rachel and Alex to know, might there be comments, preliminary comments? And I think the answer is yes, there might be.
This is Brooke. Let me jump in here because so I think we need to know what our process is. And because we need a clear decision to be made at some point. And, you know, from my background in the legal arena, when you have a tribunal that has to make a decision that can be appealed to a higher authority because they don't necessarily agree and it involves legal rights and all of that, advisory opinions are typically not allowed. You know, you have a moment to get approval, you have to submit the document and get a response to it. And I think when advisory opinions, oh, let's give you the nod whether you're on the right track. I'm not saying that we can't materially assist parties, but the board should not be making any, I don't think, any decisions other than the real decision they're supposed to make, because I think it muddies the water. And maybe they hit the mark, maybe they don't, maybe what our guidance is not
So this
the
is
legal decision.
different. It's a bit different.
Okay.
And so I hear you, and I think at the beginning of that 6-day process, having a copy that we may or may not weigh in on, that we can do a quick check for completeness and those types of things might be very beneficial. I think what we are looking to build this process on is the same process that regional planning commissions look to approve municipal plans. And within that process, there usually is an opportunity for an RPC to go to the town and say, thank you for letting us know that you're considering this plan, you're putting it before your formal boards for approval. By the way, you have not addressed this criteria. You might want to, before you go through the whole process, go back and address educational facilities or something like that. It's not complete at this time. Just as a heads up in the process for initial read. And I think the challenge that we have, or one of the challenges that we have, is we're developing the criteria and how we're going to evaluate things at the same time as we're developing the processes. And we're trying to make sure that they integrate with each other and we aren't creating exclusive scenarios. And so that's sort of the challenge. I think as I'm trying to navigate this is to get an understanding. I think staff have been doing an excellent job trying to think through that process for us as we're developing the checklist, and we're just wanting to make sure that they're matching up as best as possible. And so that's, I think the overall question I have is to bring back to the board, as we continue down this road and we continue developing the process as well as these checklists, how do we bring these to the board to get the board to say, yep, that's an okay direction to go in on both.
So Sarah, are you asking a particular question now that you would like the board to weigh in on in terms of how to move forward with this?
Yes. Last week, Janet, when you and I met with Rachel and Alex Pastor, and we were looking through the process, I think we came up with a list of questions to ask the board. I'm not sure if this is an appropriate time or not, and I guess I'm looking for guidance of how to, as we push the ball forward with the process, with the Tier 1A guidelines, how to go about that process with the board. Should I be making a formal report to the board and then asking for specific things in advance versus more sort of on the fly right now within these parameters? How would the board like that to be tackled, I guess is my question.
I think that what I would say initially is that the board at these meetings should have such questions ahead of time with relevant material, and then we could consider them at the meeting. But otherwise, I think we're just giving on the fly reporting here as to how we're doing, what our progress is. Does that answer that question?
Yes. And so I think with the rest of my time in terms of succinctly reporting where I'm at is I will be getting the board for a future agenda, maybe for next week, that sort of analysis and list of questions for the board to try and help get your informed consent as we move forward with some of these different things. I think we're making a lot of great progress with developing process and also guidelines. There are some different areas as we're getting into that analysis I think would benefit from the rest of the board weighing in on.
Okay. So Sarah's report on 1A, Tier 1A applications sort of bled into the report on regional plan applications, which is under my purview at this point. But I think I can defer to Sarah in terms of these questions that Rachel and Alex Pastor may need answers to before they proceed in setting up a digital application structure and process. So, Kirsten, do you have an update on, oh, Kirsten, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Sarah, from my perspective with all these reports, I think if we do have information that we're able to share in advance and kind of queue up questions or topics, that's great. I'm happy to do stuff on the fly a little bit if we can too. I mean, I will respond to the detail that we were just discussing as far as these plans come in 60 days. I guess I'd like to think about it a little bit more, but in my mind, we're not issuing any kind of preliminary plan approval. It's not like, you go to the town and maybe you get preliminary subdivision approval and then you go get final approval. Like it's not a stepped process for plan approval. It's just the board reviews and approves or denies, so like once. So I think if we make preliminary comments, if we're able to do that, that's great. But we're just going to have to be careful with how, what that like how that's characterized and sort of qualified. It's not like replacing the later, obviously replacing like the later actual plan approval process. So I'm kind of mindful of, and thinking along the lines of what Brooke was saying, but very open to discussing this because of course, if there's, constructive feedback that the board could offer, and in response to plans received, like, yeah, we would hope we could figure that out, how to do that. So those are just my sort of candid initial thoughts on that topic. Janet, did you want me to kind of segue into wood products? So wood products, so this morning, actually just before this meeting, I met with Catherine Servideo and Oliver Pearson from ANR, and Pete was able to join. And we went over where we are, and I explained to them that in terms of just drawing from the implementation steering committee that FPR has as a body of people to develop recommendations, that there's interest in looking at the topic more holistically, that there's interest to include some other stakeholders to that stakeholder group. And I specifically mentioned, and some of this is like sort of from my perspective, so having someone well-versed in DEC permits, ideally from ANR. And I had spoken briefly with Jen Mojo about her availability, and she's interested and available. So that's just, so someone versed in ANR DEC permits, someone versed in town permitting, in my mind, perhaps a zoning administrator from a rural area, ideally someone maybe even experienced directly with a wood products manufacturer would be great. And I've put out a feeler to Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And Janet and I spoke, and I'm also going to loop in NVDA. They may have a suggestion of a person. And that also kind of brought my own thinking to, as I've been thinking about the study, the mandate, where this might go, like the planning and the 10 different districts that the RPCs are using to lay out in the different regions, all, every
The 10,
square
the
foot of
future land
land.
use map areas, you mean?
Exactly.
Okay.
So I think that it would also be helpful to have someone, perhaps from an RPC, also like joining the stakeholder group, to help everyone understand those districts and what kind of uses one might find in the different areas, et cetera. Even though those regional plans aren't yet, at a point of completion, just having someone from an RPC in my mind would I think be a good idea. And then lastly, we talked about briefly the environmental justice factor as well. So there's agreement that the stakeholder group can be, but we still don't have sort of the final composition. And we weren't able to meet last week because both Catherine and Oliver were away. As you know, I'm headed out of town. So we're continuing on with file reviews, and I'm probably going to be helping Catherine with that. She's open to that now. And the interviews, which we have dates, and the survey that you now have seen the questions that went out to general permittees, like not just wood products manufacturer permittees, but any category of permit statewide. That same survey has gone out to the wood products manufacturer permittees that were identified for the interviews. So we're starting that process with those contacts. With that survey is somewhat lengthy. So we figured let's start there, have them go through the survey, then with the survey result for that participant in front of us, we'll do the interviews. So everything's kind of moving along. We did have a discussion about, FPR would like to also have an opportunity to engage a smaller working group from the implementation steering committee. And I said, I think that's fine. If there's a group of people who want to bring forward inputs or recommendations or suggested content to the larger stakeholder group, I think that's great. From my perspective, I mean, I think that when you're on a stakeholder group, sometimes it's your responsibility to be reaching out to other people that you may know who, are part of what you're representing on the stakeholder group. I'm not expressing that very well. But so I think that's going to happen as well. Like, I think FPR, and they are going to, I think, invite me and Pete to join those supplemental meetings. That will be a bit of a precursor to the larger stakeholder group. But the current plan is to have all the data drawn from the survey, the files review, the interviews, and some other information too that I've been looking at around status of local permitting, to have that information and then come up with sort of a roadmap for how to present this to the larger stakeholder group in the form of questions, so that it's efficient and produces the results that we, or, that if we just throw all this information at a large group of people without some kind of organized structure to the process, I think that it will be more difficult. So we've been talking about, and I've been thinking about how to have that structured stakeholder engagement process. And I might start with some one-on-one interviews with the individual participants myself. You're part of the stakeholder group. Here's the information we have. What are you thinking about in these key areas? Just to kind of help benchmark and set the stage, if you will. So, Pete, did I miss anything, or something I'll share? So I had in mind sharing with the Land Use Review Board the lists of, here's all these, randomly sampled permittees that got the survey. I think it went out to 171 and we got 56 back. So it was a quite good response rate, over 30%, I think. And but FPR did not want to publish this list of, here's the named individuals. Just being mindful of, that we had said this is an anonymous survey, and it is. The individual responses are all compiled anonymously, but similarly, they do not advise that we make known, all, like the individual interview participants, that kind of thing. So they don't want, and I think it's a fair concern about whether or not that could have a chilling effect on participation from those permittees. So I don't have as much kind of information compiled and ready to deliver that I had once envisioned, but and I can show you the list of the members of the implementation steering committee, that FPR, that cohort. But I think the people that will be involved in this study, it's just going to be a subset of that. So I'm kind of thinking that it would make sense, once those names are finalized, I'll then share that list.
Plus the additionals that you've been thinking about adding. Yeah, I
Yes.
think that's good. How do you feel like you're on track for the June 30th extension deadline?
I do.
Okay,
Yep.
okay, that's great.
Pete, did I miss anything substantive that you may think I should have?
No, the only thing I would say is FPR is continuing to be a good partner in this, and we're working with them closely, so that's great. And they seem to understand the importance of having the board, getting the board good information on the status and where things are and how it's working.
Yep.
Yeah, and I frankly don't see the need for identifying individual survey, you know, respondents.
Yeah. Yep.
Any questions for Kirsten on forest products study? Okay, Alex is not present, so we will pass on tier 3 and 8C updates for now. Any other comments on studies and reports? Wow, we are really moving along here. We have, we're 40 minutes ahead of schedule. And we have an opportunity here for public comment on agenda items. Do we have any public comment? I don't see any hands. So no public comment. We, as I said, we're 40 minutes ahead of schedule here. We were going to offer a 5-minute break. Should we have a break, or do you think we should just plow forward?
I don't need a break, but I can't speak for.
Okay,
Depending on when
Um,
we're moving into executive session, it might make sense to have a break before that. Just, I know Jenny wanted to talk to the board about something, and she has she also has a court status conference. Oh, there she's back. Maybe she's done. Are you
It
done
was
with your
3 minutes
status?
long. I'm done with
Okay,
my
great.
status conference.
Okay, I retract my suggestion that a break would be helpful before executive session.
okay.
So may I offer a possible way forward? If I was to make a motion to move into executive session, I think logistically, we here in the offices need a break to move 5 minutes to move to a different space. That would give us a few minutes. If our legal counsel is ready, I'd be happy to make that motion.
I think we're ready.
Looks like they're ready.
All right. And I'm going to make it inclusive of what we discussed, I think earlier, regarding interim. So I would like to make a motion that the board needs to discuss pending and probable Act 250 appeals, enforcement actions, and also to have confidential attorney-client communications on these matters, including the interim exemption guidance. And that we find that premature public knowledge of these matters would place the board at a substantial disadvantage, and the board enter executive session.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have
I'll
a second?
second. I'll second, also mentioning that it's the interim housing exemption guidance specifically.
Chair Hurley, we have a question from a member of the public. And we'll just say preemptively, I believe that we probably will be coming out of executive session with a decision or reconvening. Would that be fair?
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it might be worthwhile. We will be reconvening probably at the end, but your question, sir?
This is Thomas Weiss, president of Montpelier. At some point, you're going to have to make a motion to take the item off the table. And you might want to do that in open session before you go into executive session.
Which item,
If
Thomas?
you don't
Sorry.
do it now, you have to move an executive session to take it off the table.
Which item
So
are you
I think-
referring to?
You moved to table the item on, was it your discussion?
Yeah,
Housing.
You moved to put something on the table
yes,
for later action.
got it.
And in order to take it up, you'll have to take it off the table at some point, either now before you go into executive session or during executive session, and then
So just, I think the question is regarding the interim housing.
Exemptions.
Exemptions. We have tabled that. We are going into executive session and we'll probably be discussing that. However, I think the idea is that we'll reconvene afterwards and probably consider having an action on that. Or I think it would be a possibility that when we reconvene, that could be tabled to a future meeting potentially as well. I can't speak right now to see what direction we're going in, but I think any of that would be possible. If that answers your question?
it's a parliamentary issue that I wanted to bring up.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
however you choose to resolve it is your choice.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Do we have further discussion on that motion? No, so all those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
That was 4 ayes from 4 board members. We have a unanimous decision to enter into executive session. So we, as a board, will leave this meeting and return after our executive session.
Very good.
Can you hear us, Kirsten? We're ready when you are, Janet, I think.
Okay, we are recording again?
We are, yep.
Okay. Okay, so the board is back from executive session. And we have decided on some amended language for the interim housing exemption guidance. Do we have a motion on that?
Do we need to go over the modifications that were made? And so could, Steve,
Pete, could you share screen on page 7 of the guidance showing the amended language? Thank you. So this is showing in underlined red the proposed new language, and in red strike through any proposed language to be removed. This basically provides the definition of infill development that the Vermont Flood Hazard Area and River Corridor Rule uses, and it better tracks the statutory language as well. And Pete, are you saying that there are other points in this guidance document that could use the same clarifications?
Yes, there's a number of other instances where this exact same language is included, and the request would be to
Change it accordingly for each
yeah,
instance.
repeat that exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So can I make a motion to modify the interim guidance with the language as proposed and shown here?
Sure, the interim housing exemption guidance. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Okay, do we have any discussion? Okay, no discussion. Can we vote? All those in favor of these changes to the interim housing exemption guidance? Please say aye. Aye.
Kirsten,
Aye.
I.
Leave, I heard 4 ayes. That is unanimous. So
We do a
I
roll,
think,
sorry, Janet, should we do a roll call vote on that?
sure.
Aaron Todd, aye.
Brooke Dingeldine, aye.
Kirsten, I.
Janet Hurley, aye. And my interpretation is that we would empower you, Pete, to make the changes to the other instances of this language being in this document and thereby promulgating it to our district offices.
Great, will do.
So that's all we have on today's agenda. Do we have any other comments from anybody present?
I just have a procedural question. I don't know if, who's still on the call from legal? Is
Pete, would
Rebecca?
you be able to stop sharing your screen?
Anyway, my question goes to what Thomas Weiss said before we left about tabling a matter. Did we need to untable that before we voted on it? That was sort of the notion that I got from him is if you table something, you have to bring it back in order to act on it.
And I did bring it back by saying that we were going to act on it.
So I think that's fine, like, right, because maybe it wasn't as official as it could have been, but it's there, right? That we did postpone it or tabled it, right? And now we're back and we've brought it back up to discuss. So I think we're okay, right? Like that you can piece it together. And I think that meets what the underlying purposes of it all, which is that people know what we're doing, right? Like, so it's clear from our minutes and it's clear from the meeting what we're discussing. So I think we've met that. So I wouldn't worry about making a motion to untable it.
To
To
untable,
then,
okay.
I think,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a technical point. It felt technical to me, so I think we're okay.
And is this a Robert's Rules question, Brooke?
Yeah,
I guess it
Yeah.
is parliamentary
it's
procedure, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, I believe if you don't take the motion back from the table by the end of the meeting, then the motion dies and you'd have to bring it up again in a future meeting. But since you guys did,
Mhm.
you're done.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you for asking, Brooke.
Just to follow up on Brooke's question, with the Land Use Review Board, we accepted all of the sort of policies that the NRB was operating under. Did the NRB formally adopt Robert's Rules of Order? And if so, was it for a small board? Was it the entirety? Are there procedural rules that we should be aware of to be operating under?
There are the 2014 rules of procedure for the board. I do not believe that they adopted Robert rules in their procedural rules.
They're not in there. I just reviewed those rules this morning and there's nothing regarding Robert's rules in there. And they're not procedural rules so much as, I mean, they're not meeting procedural rules. So,
These were
Yeah,
operational, perhaps.
Yeah, I think they're helpful, like a guide. Potentially, if you want to be like how far you want to follow them. The place I saw them listed was actually on the Secretary of State's website when it talks about public meetings, and it's just a reference. So it could be something that's helpful, but it's not anything. But it is something we could think about if we do want to update that procedures for our meetings and for this board. That is something we can do to update that. Whether we need Robert's rules or not, I don't know, but we can update that now that we've had some of these under our belt.
Thank you.
I'll just note, I
Maybe-
just confirmed that there's no reference to Robert rules in the open meeting laws.
Oh, yeah. It's just on the website for the Secretary of State, not to be clear. Yeah.
okay, any more comments from the board or others? Okay, well, thank you, everybody. That was an efficient meeting. We're done an hour early. And we have a meeting later in the week. Has that agenda been posted? Do we need to post that agenda?
Let me check.
I know it's expected to be an executive session, but we still need to post an agenda.
There's an agenda posted for March 6th on the website.
Okay, thanks, Rachel.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
I
We
think we
will
need a
see
motion
you-
to adjourn.
Need a
Yeah,
motion
we
to.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, we do need that.
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Any discussion? No, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That was 4 ayes. That's a unanimous decision to adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
You.
you.
Bye.
He signed in and I tried to put who was online. Back.